A line was drawn across the dark of the void. Nobody believed the warning. They saw a frail species hiding behind arbitrary coordinates and assumed weakness. They were wrong. When the Armada crossed the boundary, they didn't find a terrified people. They found a loaded gun. Admiral Thomas Graves stood on the observation deck of the orbital station Tartarus. He did not look at the stars. He looked at the dead space between them. The command center smelled of stale coffee, overheated copper, and the distinct, sour sweat of 200 technicians working a 30-hour shift. The hum of the life support scrubbers vibrated through the soles of Graves's boots. It was a grounding sensation, a reminder that humanity was clinging to the edge of an airless abyss, kept alive only by stubborn engineering and a refusal to die quietly. On the central holotable, a glowing crimson ring orbited the Sol system, the Terran boundary. "Telemetry from the outer buoys," Arthur Stanton said. The chief tactical officer didn't look up from his console. His voice was a flat, exhausted rasp. "Slipspace ruptures detected. Sector 4. They're coming." Graves pressed his hands against the cold steel of the railing. "Numbers?" "Massive," Stanton replied, his fingers flying across the haptic interface. "Hundreds of signatures. Dreadnoughts, carriers, escort frigates. It's the Coalition vanguard." Graves closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He felt a deep, aching tiredness settle into his bones. Humanity had begged the Coalition for isolation. For 50 years, Earth had played their games. They had traded, bled, and fought in proxy wars for alien empires that viewed humans as little more than clever apes with a knack for violence. When the Terran Parliament finally voted to pull back, to close the borders and focus on rebuilding a shattered solar system, the Coalition laughed. They sent diplomats first, demanding tribute. When Earth refused, they sent sanctions. Now they were sending the fleet. "They think it's a bluff," Graves murmured. "People usually do until their teeth are knocked out," Stanton said. He tapped a final sequence into the board. "The lead elements are decelerating. 3 million kilometers from the boundary. They're forming up for a breach." Graves turned to face the room. The technicians were silent. Every eye was fixed on his imposing frame. They were young, most of them. Too young to remember the brutal subjugation wars, but old enough to have grown up in the shadow of a galaxy that wanted to consume them. "Open a wideband channel," Graves ordered. "Unencrypted. Let the whole damn galaxy hear it." A technician nodded. "Channel open, Admiral." Graves didn't clear his throat. He didn't posture. He spoke with the quiet, terrifying certainty of a man who has already dug a grave for his enemy. "This is Admiral Thomas Graves of the Terran Defense Coalition. You are approaching restricted space. The Terran Parliament has declared all sectors beyond this coordinate off-limits to non-human vessels. Turn back. If you cross the boundary, you will not be boarded. You will not be asked to surrender. You will be destroyed. This is your only warning." He drew a finger across his throat. The channel snapped shut. Silence stretched out in the command center, heavy and suffocating. On the holotable, the swarm of blue icons, the Coalition fleet, hung motionless against the red line. For a long minute, nothing happened. The aliens were likely deliberating, analyzing the transmission for signs of deception. They would be scanning the darkness, looking for human armadas, defense platforms, or massive energy spikes. They wouldn't find any. Graves knew exactly what the alien commanders were seeing. Empty space. A few automated navigation buoys. Dust. To a Coalition fleet accustomed to set-piece battles and grand naval formations, the human border looked completely defenseless. "Lead dreadnought is moving," Stanton said softly. "They're crossing the line." Graves felt his chest tighten. Not with fear, but with a profound, cynical grief. They never learned. The universe was full of ancient, arrogant species who believed that peace was merely the absence of a large enough gun. Humanity had tried to be different. They had tried to walk away. Now, the galaxy had forced their hand. "Arm the dark matter mines," Graves said. Deep in the void, 3 million kilometers away, the trap sprang shut. The coalition dreadnoughts crossed the threshold with their shields blazing, expecting plasma fire or laser batteries. They expected a fight. Humanity didn't give them a fight. Humanity gave them an industrial slaughterhouse. The space around the fleet didn't light up with energy weapons. It simply tore itself apart. The automated buoys weren't navigation beacons. They were gravitational anchors. When the dreadnoughts crossed the tripwire, the anchors detonated, ripping microscopic holes in the fabric of space-time. On the holotable, the lead blue icons didn't flash or fight back. They just vanished. "Direct hits on the Vanguard," Stanton reported, his voice devoid of triumph. "Gravity shears ripped their hulls in half. I'm reading massive decompression across their front line." "They're scattering," a sensor operator called out. "Escort frigates are breaking formation, attempting evasive maneuvers." "Let them run," Graves said. "They're in the kill box." The coalition fleet, panicked by the sudden, silent annihilation of their largest ships, broke their rigid formations. They angled their thrusters, trying to retreat or flank an enemy they couldn't see. They drove straight into the shrapnel fields. Months ago, Terran freighters had dumped millions of tons of dense, jagged tungsten slag into the border zones. It was completely inert, invisible to thermal scans, undetectable by energy sensors. It was just trash, floating dead in the vacuum, until the alien ships slammed into it at combat speeds. The holotable lit up with dozens of tiny, frantic warning markers as the alien frigates shredded themselves against the debris. Shields designed to deflect high-yield plasma were completely useless against dumb, kinetic mass. Hulls were peeled open like tin cans, engines choked and exploded. "Total chaos in their ranks," Stanton observed. "They're firing blindly into the dark." Graves watched the slaughter with a grim, uncompromising stare. This was not a battle. It was pest control. The galaxy had pushed humanity into a corner, and humanity had responded by turning the very physics of space into a weapon. "Send in the wolves," Graves ordered. Captain Rachel Hayes sat in the pilot's seat of the stealth prowler Nightshade. The cockpit was plunged in red tactical lighting, casting deep shadows across the sharp planes of her face. The ship was utterly silent. No engine rumble, no active sensors, no comms chatter. The Nightshade was a ghost, painted in radar-absorbent vantablack, running on cold thrusters. Through the armored viewport, the distant stars were blocked out by the massive, burning wreckage of the coalition fleet. "Target acquired," muttered David Locke, her weapons officer. He was a broad-shouldered man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, his face pressed against the targeting shroud. "Coalition cruiser. Engines are crippled, but her main batteries are still cycling. She's trying to establish a defensive perimeter." "Distance?" Hayes asked. 400 kilometers. "She's blind, Captain. Her thermal sensors are flooded by the burning wreckage around her." "She doesn't know we're here." Hayes felt the familiar, cold spike of adrenaline. She hated this. She hated the silence of it, the cold-blooded necessity of it. But she remembered the footage from the siege of Orion. She remembered the alien bombardments that had melted human colonies into glass. The Coalition didn't care about human lives. They only cared about submission. "Load the railgun," Hayes commanded. "Solid depleted uranium slugs. No explosive payloads. Let's punch a hole right through her." The Nightshade shuddered slightly, as the massive magnetic accelerator running the length of the ship spun up. It was a crude weapon by galactic standards. The aliens used focused light and elegant plasma coils. Humans used magnetism to throw heavy rocks at unthinkable speeds. "Spun up and locked," Locke said. "Fire!" There was no sound in the vacuum, but the recoil kicked the prowler backward, rattling Hayes's teeth. A streak of absolute kinetic fury shot across the blackness. 400 kilometers away, the alien cruiser simply snapped. The uranium slug struck the vessel's midsection at a fraction of the speed of light. It didn't explode. It delivered so much kinetic energy in a single microsecond that the alien armor behaved like liquid. The slug punched through the port side, vaporized the ship's main reactor, and exited the starboard side before the alien crew even knew they were under attack. The cruiser's lights flickered and died. A moment later, secondary explosions rippled across its hull, tearing the massive ship into jagged ribbons of burning metal. "Target destroyed," Locke said evenly. "Switching to the next." Hayes exhaled slowly. "Keep us in the debris field. Use their burning ships to mask our heat signature." All along the boundary, the same brutal scene was playing out. Human prowlers, tiny and invisible, stalked through the wreckage like predators in tall grass. They didn't engage in dogfights. They didn't broadcast challenges. They slipped out from behind floating chunks of destroyed dreadnoughts, fired their railguns, and melted back into the shadows. The Coalition fleet was bleeding out in the dark. Aboard the Tartarus, Admiral Graves watched the casualty counters tick upward. The blue icons on the holotable were winking out, one by one. The invincible armada of the Galactic Coalition was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that refused to even show its face. "Admiral," Stanton called out, his voice breaking the tense silence of the command center. "I'm picking up a transmission from the Coalition command ship. It's tight beam, directed at us." "Put it on the speakers," Graves said. The bridge echoed with a burst of static, followed by the synthesized translation of an alien voice. It was pitched high, laced with a warble that sounded dangerously close to panic. "Terran Command. This is Fleetmaster Corvus of the Coalition. Cease fire, I repeat, cease fire. We are pulling our ships back. We demand a temporary truce to recover our dead and negotiate terms of withdrawal." Graves stared at the holotable. The surviving alien ships were huddling together, their weapons firing wildly into the empty space around them. They were terrified. For the first time in their long, arrogant history, the Coalition was tasting absolute defeat. "Mute them," Graves said. Stanton blinked. "Sir, they're asking for a parley." "I know what they're asking for," Graves said, his voice hard as iron. He turned to look at his tactical officer. "If we had lost a battle in their space, would they let us recover our dead? If they had breached Earth's defenses, would they negotiate?" Stanton looked down at his console. He knew the answer. Every human in the room knew the answer. "No," Graves answered for him. "They would have burned our cities from orbit to make an example of us. They didn't come here to talk, Arthur. They came here to put the dog back on the leash." Graves looked back at the holotable. The red line of the Terran boundary glowed intensely in the dim light of the command center. "We warned them," Graves said softly. "We told them this line was death. If we let them walk away now, if we show them mercy, they'll just come back in 10 years with better shields and thicker armor. We have to show the galaxy that crossing our border isn't a political misstep. It's suicide." He took a deep breath, the sterile air of the station filling his lungs. "Tell the prowlers to ignore the command ship for now. Let the Fleetmaster watch. I want every single escort, every frigate, every carrier burned to ash. Leave nothing but the flagship." Stanton swallowed hard, but his hands moved quickly over the controls, relaying the orders. Out in the void, the slaughter accelerated. The human prowlers stopped picking off stragglers and began coordinated strikes. Railgun slugs ripped through the alien defensive formations. Automated drone swarms detached from the navigation buoys, latching onto enemy thrusters and detonating shaped charges. Captain Hayes watched from the cockpit of the Nightshade as an alien carrier tried to spin up its slipspace drive to escape. The massive energy spike lit up her sensors like a beacon. "Lock onto their drive core," Hayes snapped. "Locked," Locke replied. "Fire!" The railgun fired. The carrier's drive core, already volatile from the slipspace buildup, took the kinetic strike directly. The resulting explosion didn't just destroy the carrier, it created a localized spatial anomaly that dragged 3 nearby escort frigates into the collapsing singularity. They crumpled like paper balls before vanishing in a blinding flash of white light. Hayes slumped back in her chair. The viewport was filled with the silent, glowing embers of 100 dead ships. "Good God," Locke whispered, staring at the sensor readouts. "There's almost nothing left." Hayes closed her eyes. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a butcher. But as she thought of the blue skies of Earth, the quiet colonies on Mars, and the fragile peace they had fought so hard to build, the guilt hardened into something cold and resolute. They wanted a monster. Humanity had obliged. The massacre lasted exactly 42 minutes. On the observation deck of the Tartarus, the holotable had gone completely still. The swirling storm of blue icons representing the Coalition vanguard was gone. In its place hung a massive, static cloud of grey debris markers. The automated systems were struggling to categorize the sheer volume of wreckage. A graveyard of twisted alloy, venting atmosphere, and frozen bodies now drifted harmlessly along the Terran boundary. Only one blue icon remained. The Coalition flagship, Radiant Dawn. It sat dead in the center of the kill zone. Its primary fusion drives were offline. Its shields had burned out, trying to deflect the concussive shockwaves of its dying escort vessels. It was bleeding coolant and oxygen into the void, a crippled leviathan surrounded by the shredded carcasses of its own fleet. "Status on the prowler wings," Admiral Graves said. His voice was a low rumble, barely cutting through the heavy silence of the command center. Arthur Stanton dragged a hand down his face. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. "Prowlers are pulling back, sir. They've expended 80% of their kinetic ordnance. Drone swarms have entered standby mode and are reattaching to the boundary buoys. The sector is secure." Graves nodded slowly. He stepped away from the railing and walked down to the main console. He didn't feel the rush of victory. He felt a hollow, leaden weight in his stomach. He had just authorized the deaths of over 200,000 sentient beings. It was an atrocity of galactic proportions, executed with the cold efficiency of an assembly line. "Reopen the channel to the flagship," Graves ordered. "Audio and visual." Stanton hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying. The main screen above the holotable flickered to life. The bridge of the Radiant Dawn was a scene of utter devastation. Emergency sirens flashed in a rhythmic, strobing red, casting long shadows across the bulkheads. Smoke poured from ruptured conduits, and several alien crew members lay motionless on the deck. In the center of the chaos stood Fleetmaster Corvus. He was a tall, imposing figure of a species that had never known defeat. His ceremonial armor, usually a gleaming gold, was scorched and covered in the grey dust of electrical fires. His 4 mandated eyes stared into the visual pickup, wide and manic. The arrogant posture he had carried into the Sol system was completely broken. He looked like a man who had just watched his gods die. "Terran Command," Corvus rasped, his translation collar struggling to filter the raw panic from his voice. You You fired without provocation. This is an act of war. This is a war crime against the Coalition." Graves looked at the screen with an expression made entirely of stone. "You crossed a sovereign boundary with a fleet of warships, Fleet Master," Graves replied. The calmness in his tone was far more terrifying than anger would have been. "We gave you a warning. We told you exactly what would happen. You chose to test our resolve. You provoked your own destruction." Corvus gripped the edges of his command console, his knuckles turning white. "You butchered them. We were trying to retreat. We offered a parley, and you butchered them in the dark like cowards." "We fought a war on your terms once," Graves said, leaning closer to the camera pickup. "We lined our ships up. We fought with honor. And you burned our colonies. You bombarded civilian outposts from orbit because it was strategically convenient. Do not lecture humanity on cowardice, Corvus. We learned how to survive from you." The Fleet Master opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. The sheer, overwhelming reality of his situation seemed to finally crush the defiance out of him. He looked around his shattered bridge, then back to the screen. "What now?" Corvus whispered. "Do you intend to finish us?" Graves looked at the sole remaining ship on his tactical display. He could end it right now. A single command, and a prowler would put a depleted uranium slug through the flagship's bridge, wiping the Coalition vanguard from existence entirely. It would be tactically sound, leave no survivors. But Graves wasn't fighting a battle. He was building a wall. Walls needed messengers. "No," Graves said. "Your primary drives are gone, but your navigational thrusters are intact. You have enough auxiliary power to limp back to the nearest mass relay. It will take you a month drifting in the dark, surrounded by the ghosts of your armada." Corvus stared at him, bewildered. "You're letting us go?" "I am sending you back," Graves corrected. "When you reach the Coalition Senate, you will stand before them. You will show them the sensor logs of this massacre. You will tell them that Earth is not hiding because we are weak. We are hiding because we are tired of killing." Graves stood up straight, his face hardening into an uncompromising mask. "Tell them the Terran boundary is closed. If they send a diplomatic envoy, we will shoot it down. If they send another fleet, we will turn it into dust. Do not contact us. Do not look our way. We are off limits. If anyone crosses that line again, we won't stop at the border. We will march on your capital, and we will do to your worlds what we just did to your fleet." Graves looked at Stanton and gave a short nod. "Get off my lawn," Graves said. The transmission cut out. The main screen went black. On the holotable, the solitary blue icon began to turn. It was agonizingly slow, the crippled flagship fighting against its own mass. But it turned. Slowly, pathetically, the radiant dawn ignited its chemical thrusters and began the long, humiliating crawl away from the red line. Graves watched it go. The command center remained dead silent. There was no cheering. There was no celebration. The technicians just stared at their screens, processing the sheer scale of the violence they had unleashed. "Stanton," Graves said quietly. "Yes, Admiral." "Have the engineering crews begin deploying the next wave of gravity anchors. Bring up the secondary minefields. The debris is going to drift, and we need the net completely tight before the month is out." "Aye, sir, right away." Graves turned his back on the holotable and walked toward his private quarters. He felt a sudden, desperate need for a glass of bourbon and 12 hours of dreamless sleep. Humanity had finally won its independence. He just wondered how long they would be able to wash the blood off their hands. Space is vast, and news travels slowly across the immense stretches of the void. But terror moves at the speed of light. When the radiant dawn finally limped out of slipspace above the Coalition capital world of Prime, it caused a planet-wide panic. The ship was unrecognizable. Its hull was scorched black, its armor plating stripped away, and its internal decks sealed off to contain a dozen hull breaches. The Senate demanded answers. The High Command demanded to know where the rest of the vanguard was. Fleetmaster Corvus didn't give a speech. He didn't try to justify the loss. He simply uploaded the raw, unedited sensor logs from the flagship to the Senate's central network. The Coalition watched in collective horror. They saw their mightiest dreadnoughts torn in half by invisible gravity shears. They watched their agile escorts shred themselves against inert fields of floating rock. And worst of all, they saw the human prowlers. The logs captured brief, terrifying glimpses of the stealth ships slipping out of the shadows, delivering catastrophic kinetic strikes, and vanishing before a target lock could even be established. It was not a battle. It was an extermination. The Senate debated for exactly 1 day. The Hawks, those who had previously pushed for Earth's subjugation, demanded a retaliatory strike. They argued that the humans had resorted to cheap tricks and cowardly tactics, but the admirals of the High Command shut them down. They had analyzed the telemetry. The humans had fortified an entire solar system with weapons that didn't require power. Weapons that couldn't be jammed or reasoned with. To break the Terran boundary, the Coalition would have to sacrifice half its total military strength. And even then, they had no guarantee that Earth wouldn't just pull them deeper into a grinder of their own making. The motion to retaliate was dismissed. A new edict was passed. Sol Sector was declared a dead zone. All navigation charts were updated with a massive, pulsing crimson warning overlaying human space. Trade routes were redirected. Patrol fleets were ordered to stay at least 10 light-years away from the boundary. Humanity became the ghost story of the galaxy. They became the monsters in the dark. Alien mothers told their children to behave, or the Terran prowlers would drag them into the void. To the Coalition, humans were no longer clever apes. They were apex predators, a species so violently unhinged that they had turned the fundamental laws of physics into a meat grinder. 1 year later, Captain Rachel Hayes sat on the outer hull of the Nightshade. She was tethered to an airlock, wearing a heavy EVA suit. The magnetic boots gripped the vantablack plating tightly. Around her, the universe was perfectly still. The debris field from the Vanguard fleet was mostly gone, pushed out into the deep void by automated sweepers or pulled into the gravity wells of the outer gas giants. The boundary was clean, quiet. Through the tinted visor of her helmet, Hayes watched the distant, cold light of the stars. She checked her wrist monitor. The patrol sector was green. No anomalies, no slipspace ruptures, no alien ships testing their luck. Just endless, undisturbed peace. David Locke's voice crackled over the private comms channel. "Hey Cap, shift is almost up. Tartarus Control is signaling us to come in for docking and refit." "Copy that, David," Hayes said. She didn't move immediately. She just sat there on the hull, looking out at the vast nothingness. "You good out there?" Locke asked, his voice softening. He knew what she was looking at. He knew what they all saw when they stared into the black. "I'm fine," Hayes replied, just enjoying the view. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. They had bought this peace with a mountain of corpses. They had secured their home by proving they could be more ruthless, more cold-blooded than any empire in the galaxy. It was a heavy burden. Hayes knew she would carry the faces of the frozen alien crew members in her nightmares for the rest of her life. But as she looked back over her shoulder, toward the pale blue dot of Earth hanging suspended in the dark, she knew she would do it all again. Humanity hadn't closed its borders out of hatred. They hadn't built the kill zone out of malice. They had done it out of love, a violent, desperate love for a fragile home that simply wanted to be left alone. The galaxy had defied them, and the galaxy had paid the price. Now, the line was drawn, and it would never be crossed again. Hayes reached down, unclipped her tether, and cycled the airlock. The void remained silent. The void is dark, and humanity's borders remain sealed. If you enjoyed this journey into the brutal, unyielding resolve of the Terran defense, do not let the story end here. Hit that like button to support the channel, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe for more epic tales of humanity defying the galaxy. Your support keeps the drive spinning and the stories flowing. Drop a comment down below. What would you do out on the boundary?